as they come forth. Let me introduce these fine contributors to public policy as they head to the stage. In no particular order, we'll do it in alphabetical order. Jim Betts, hand up, Jim. I first came to know Jim when he was the supremo of all things transport in Victoria. Eventually saw the light, came to Sydney. He's now the all-powerful head of infrastructure in New South Wales and probably one of the most trusted bureaucrats in this state, which helps when you're ahead of an assurance agency for government, and he gives them that assurance regularly. Most importantly for me, he's currently building Parramatta Stadium, where the Eels will win the premiership within the next 30 years. It's part of his role. Tim Williams next to him. Dr. Tim Williams, Timmy as he's known to me, one of the great public intellectuals of this city, the smartest Welshman ever to grace our shores, and immigration didn't get my letter because he's officially now a citizen of the nation and got through. I want to pay tribute to Tim, who's very soon to retire as the CEO of the Greater Sydney Commission, the great partnership that Tim and Lucy first formed in running that entity, which not only has given greater focus to Sydney's urbanism, but has been a tremendous partner in focusing the city's consideration about its Western Sydney partner. So Tim, good luck and Godspeed. He's taking up a professorship at Western Sydney, and apparently in whatever he feels like talking about. We'll have him, because everything he says is interesting, and going on to be one of the ARUP's global urbanist teams. So congratulations, Tim. Will Dwyer, Goodman, small little company Goodman, only the second largest owner of industrial property on earth, part of this incredible success story of this city creating organisations like Lend-Lease and Westfield and Macquarie Bank and others who've gone forth in a global domination of property finance and management. And Will's the policy brain, strategy brain at Goodman, who's heavily involved in things like how to take factories in Alexandria and turn them into urban living and how to help build the headworks and the infrastructure needed for Western Sydney. Thank you, Will. Lindy Deitz, the CEO of the great city of Campbelltown. The feisty local government contributor who is literally taking what was, as I said, the great Whitlam city in the 70s and now giving it life with her council to reimagine what Campbelltown can be, the role it can play as a medical and education hub, empowered by proximity to the new airport and hopefully connected by a new north-south train line that'll eventually do it. And the bloke on the end who's in charge of much of everything else, Geoff Roberts, Dr. Geoff, Professor Geoff Roberts, is, there you go, that clicker's on the floor again. Geoff is the Deputy Chief Commissioner, the Economic Commissioner as well of the Greater Sydney Commission, who buried the bodies in earlier life and now came in. He's gone from poacher to gamekeeper. And he has been, together with Lucy and Sarah Hill, an incredible driving force in that commission. He's personally got carriage of the Airtropolis too, as Lucy is the queen of G-pop. He's the king of Airtropolis in the Western City, Airport City, and intrinsically engaged at the very hub of where to next. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the panel that's meant to enliven everything. This is the bit where we pay great tribute. We stand on the shoulders of all those who are doing all the magnificent planning, some of them on stage, agencies at either end, advocates, regulators, investors. We're coming through the golden age of planning in New South Wales, and an era where those of us haven't seen it before, where not only are road and rail in the same department, land use and transport sit in the same room and talk to each other, and education and health and others, and treasury and DPC all sit around a table called the GSC. That Infrastructure New South Wales, not only as an assurance agency, but including as a policy wing and doing some development under Project New South Wales as well. Local government, Lindy, who's leading the campaign for the Western City Councils within the city deal, with the federal government re-engaged in urban Australia. And all coming together, which is great. We can all, quite rightly, I mean, with no sense of irony, what an amazing time we've had of bringing people together, planning future transport studies, planning under the GSC and the metro and the regional and district plans, planning for a city deal, all in any of those projects on their own would be the once every 10, 15, 20-year planning thing. We're doing them all at the same time and spending $1 billion a month on infrastructure. So what have we got to whinge about? Nothing, you would say, except our contention is, as we look playing catch-ups of Western Sydney particularly and over the horizon, how do we make it all happen now? How do we sanctify the planning that's gone on and the resource allocation? How do we actually get steel laid? How do we get the water pipes in the right place? How do we get a governance structure? How do we implement a value capture mechanism that can pay for it all? And that's what we want to talk about today with a group of 5 feisty individuals, is to say, can we actually now deliver? Whether it's GPOP, whether it's Aerotropolis, whether it's the green grid and blue grid at another level, whether it's enough hospital beds and school rooms that's going to meet that population. So, assemble this lot. So I've told them they're not allowed to have speeches, they're not allowed to have any prepared stuff. I just want them fighting each other and taking your questions from the floor as we have a proper debate about how that can happen. I always start in the feisty middle because Will Dwyer's the feistiest private sector developer I know. Will, Goodman, global engagement all around the world. You see the green square all over the world in sites. Essentially, in some ways, a land farmer that Goodman is. It develops factories which eventually become residential or others, then invest further along. You've got an awful lot of global capital tied up in Alexandria, Botany, etc., and you have an awful lot of plans to move towards Western Sydney. Is it right, even if we embrace value capture, how do we have it in a way that if you develop a factory in Botany or Alexandria and that money is connected, should it be right that we get to take that away? Should value capture only be an innately local thing, or should we find a mechanism to spread the wealth?
Well, firstly, I'd say that it's important to note that all of the land in Alexandria is actually zoned commercial now. That happened about 3 years ago. So even though it looks like industrial with sheds, the reason for that is that there's no public transport to Alexandria, and notwithstanding the recent announcement of the Sydney to Bankstown Metro, there was no station placed at Alexandria. So that makes it really difficult for the transition of that space to occur and almost entrenches that continued industrial activity. There's a number of other moving parts to that problem, but I think the way we see Sydney, from our perspective, our portfolio goes from Port Botany all the way to the Blue Mountains, is that Sydney's a really cohesive, well, should be a cohesive economic unit, not split up into fiefdoms across all the council areas, which is how it currently operates. And to that end, you have precincts like Eastern Creek, which we say is a priority precinct, not that it's a priority precinct in the way in which the Premier would understand it, being overlooked for infrastructure spending to keep the jobs transitioning into Eastern Creek, but instead, we allocate money to Badgerys Creek, which is a decade away from producing any real or meaningful jobs. So the only way you can govern, I think, for the needs of the whole of Sydney is to create a metropolitan infrastructure levy so that every development, doesn't matter what class of development it is, everyone's paying a little piece towards that, the need to shift the uses around Sydney, which is what the catalytic projects like West Connects and intermodal hubs and Badgerys Creek are trying to achieve, but they're dislocated because they don't really have the resources to make the pieces move.
Jim, we've campaigned, as you know, openly for Western Sydney to take a lead role in pay-to-play and value capture. But how do I tell the residents, the ratepayers of Lindy's area in Campbelltown, who quite rightly front up with whatever $1,000 levy on their block of land to develop, when the great people of Castle Hill are selling their $1 million homes for $5 million and taking the piss out of the taxpayer that's paid for their new train line? Where do we get an equity in a value capture system that has, if the West is going to pay for all of their new infrastructure, the East and the North haven't been paying for theirs? Just start with the easy question.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I appreciate it. I want to start by acknowledging Duncan Gay, who's in the audience. He's one of the finest roads ministers Australia's seen in recent years, and I haven't had a chance to acknowledge him publicly. That gave me the time to think of the answer to your question as well, apart from anything else. Well, first of all, value capture, you have to declutter the debate. It's a term which means different things to different people, ranging from building commercial developments on top of railway lines, which I regard as, or I characterise as vegetarian value capture. It's kind of hard to object to, through to a whole series of different localised levies designed to claw back some of the property uplift that occurs when publicly funded investment is put in place, through to things like we've seen in London, which gets characterised as value capture, but is in fact just a levy on rates, which is highly generalised. And the more you move in that direction, you're really talking about generalised taxation. And if we wanted a way of reconciling infrastructure with uplift in land value, the easiest way home would be to have a generalised land tax, which is something that the government hasn't been prepared to come at previously. But what is the burning platform? The burning platform is that we not only need to respond to demand as it exists within the existing city in which we are now and the emerging city in the centre, we need to reconfigure the industrial and demographic geography of the city in alignment with the three cities concept that the Greater Sydney Commission has come up with. Infrastructure won't be the only enabler of that, but it'll be critical. And our capacity to deliver it within a constrained fiscal environment will be greatly enhanced if we're able to unlock new sources of funding, whether that's through asset recycling, which we've done a lot of in New South Wales. We may be reaching the limit of what the community is prepared to tolerate there. Commonwealth funding contributions, which are in real terms declining right now, and that's unlikely to get better for New South Wales, or unlocking new sources of funding and value capture may be one of those, but we need to ensure that it's equitable at the point where it's implemented, that it's contemplated and discussed with the community early. And we can talk about the injustices of the East versus the West, but the greater injustice, it seems to me, would be to deprive the West for another generation of adequate infrastructure on the basis that it's unaffordable and that value capture may be the lesser of the two evils.
Good answer. Tim, you and I have been fighting a battle somewhat lonely and sometimes in favour of value capture within industry. Property Council and the Urban Task Force who call it value theft, IPA and Treasury who just want to sell stuff, and it's too hard to get and planning who's meant to be in charge of value capture, and I'm still waiting to come out. Do we all have responsibility? What role for the private sector is we're seeing governments in retreat on engagement in private funding, airports nationalised, we're building coal-fired power stations off the taxpayer now apparently, we pulled the PPP from the light rail and from the regional hospitals. Is it on the private sector to get back into the narrative if we are going to expect government to have the courage to talk about user pays in whichever way it manifests itself?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think there's been quite good consensus already, actually, that there needs to be business as usual will not deliver us a Sydney of 8 million. The city conceived of in the Greater Sydney Commission plans just will not be delivered. We have to do something different. That difference seems to be about paying for certain kinds of infrastructure which support the vision of growth. Somebody has to pay. There's a lot of value coming from public investment, essentially creating value for the private sector. So everybody gets that should be done. It's how it should be done. I think there's another issue, though, which is touched on a bit by the Metropolitan Levy discussion, which I support, and the land tax discussion, which I support, which is essentially this, that not all new infrastructure need to be paid by new development, or indeed the development process. Essentially, we're not charging people enough for the city that we wish to build in a general sense. A couple of things as well, I think, about other delivery issues, not just value capture. It's important also to understand value capture, I think, is critical to get the public transport up. As we know, we can get toll roads up because they, until yesterday, pay for themselves. By which I mean yesterday's revelation that we have to have compensation on the rego to pay for a toll road, I think changes the game fundamentally about how we, not just how we fund infrastructure, but what we fund. The logic of the Greater Sydney Commission plan is a fast public transport link between the CBD of Sydney and the Westland Parkland city. It must come before any other priority if that plan is to be delivered. So the F6 should be pushed to the next 20 years, the Northern Beaches Tunnel to the next 20 years, the Western City Metro is the key infrastructure that creates the plan. It's also the equitable infrastructure that Western Sydney needs. So I think we should really focus on those. And the last thing I think is about delivery vehicles, not just value capture. Everywhere else where we want to create something new, and by the way, we sometimes talk about the number of homes we're going to see in Western Sydney. What's great in the Greater Sydney Commission plan is a serious attempt to talk about placemaking, but we're effectively creating towns and cities. And just to say, whenever I hear people say we're putting a community or a city the size of Canberra west of Macarthur, I say there are 38 schools in Canberra, right? I.e., it's a big, big issue about making a new city. And we've got to get behind the plan. We've got to get behind the collaboration across government. Politicians have to get that there are certain priorities that are more important than other priorities. And the era of, frankly, superficial political policy making is over if we're serious about this city.
By the way, this works. I'm going to keep asking questions. I see you guys asking questions, so jump up and I'll look and I'll come straight to you. Lindy, we just, as Tim said, a city the size of Canberra built west of you, or as I said earlier today, by 2050 we move Western Australia into Western Sydney in population terms and add them to what we've got. You're at the front line, you're in local government, which is always resource starved, the end of the line when it comes to government, as always. How do you cope with the concept of that population growth? How do you contemplate the schools and the water pipes and the hospital beds that are going to be required for you to deliver just in a local government sense? And I'll ask the context, you're in the middle of city deals. Are we all waiting for the great explosion of what city deals changes the world, or should we get ready for incrementalism?
Look, I think the only way that we are going to be able to address the infrastructure shortage is purely through collaboration. I don't think there's any one solution or
All
stakeholder.
governments and public-private?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the absolute beauty of what the Greater Sydney Commission and the work that they are doing, and particularly through the City Deals process, is it's actually building the capacity of collaboration. And I think that that is key. So to be able to get local government areas to work with local government areas, that's a step even in itself. To take away from the competitiveness that I think sadly government generates with its funding models is really important to be able to create the success for a region. And that's what the City Deals process is doing at the moment. It's 8 local government areas joining forces, working collaboratively with state and federal government. And the next step is to work with the key stakeholders, so the community, the institutions, the private development sector. I don't think there is one single solution, and I think the only way that you can attack this is to be proactive. So for us in Campbelltown, yes, we are the metropolitan city centre, part of the metropolitan city centre. They keep changing the terms on me all the time, but part of that cluster that is going to surround the airport. We need to be on the front foot looking at innovation, putting our hand up for pilots and just trying all the different ways to achieve what we need to achieve, because the growth is there. People keep saying the growth is coming. The roads are already congested. The ability to get to what I call the soft infrastructure, which are hospitals, education, universities and shopping centres, is already constrained.
Geoff Roberts, the question just came in, which is perfectly timed. It's always good timing for you, sir. But I combine with the quote that drives me forward in regards to, when you said you're in the middle of an Airtropolis, a bold plan of a federal, state and local governments coming together, inherent to the city deal. And Townsville are getting a footy stadium, Launceston they're getting the hospital, here we're getting an airport and everything else. But the great E.G. Whitlam in 1972 in Blacktown said, "A national government which cuts itself off from responsibility for the nation's cities is cutting itself off from the nation's real life. A national government which has nothing to say about cities has nothing relevant or enduring to say about the nation or the nation's future." There's a couple of Turnbulls who've changed that debate significantly again in a coalition government, which is tremendous, and we want to entrench the federal government always having a role in our cities. To that point, I wouldn't be rude enough to ask Lucy this, because G-Pop's her baby, and you're in Airtropolis. But we just heard Lucy's vision for G-Pop, so I put to you, how do we actually get it developed? How does Lucy become the Coordinator General? Does SOPA get expanded, shrunk? Does Parramatta Council take on? How do we go from the glorious planning, the really good planning we've done, and actually have somebody levy the value capture levy, talk to transport, work out where the bridge needs to be, go to schools, go to hospitals? Can it just sit with the Commission's current powers, or is there a next life of the Greater Sydney Commission to get your hands dirty more like Jim's to sort of stretch from assurance into delivery?
Thanks, Chris. Nice, easy question. I'm sure that was a Dorothy Dixer by you. I don't think it came from anybody in the audience. Look, a couple of things before I directly answer that. I think we've got to move away from thinking about infrastructure or housing or Eastern Creek or jobs. We've got to start thinking about place, and I think one of the contributions that we've made this year is really a shift away from the silos of delivering individual parts of the city into thinking about the whole. Now, I would regard, and people are telling us, that one of our major achievements this year is to put out a land use and transport integrated plan. Now, we've only just started. I mean, that actually wasn't that hard to achieve with the leadership of Lucy and Sarah and and Claire Gardner-Barnes and Tim Reardon. But I see some of our friends from health and education and the green and blue grid people in the room. Why don't we just actually start thinking about as a city as a place which has different components of it that needs to deliver sustainability, livability and productivity. So when we start thinking about can we afford to build X project or Y project, it needs to be judged against what contribution that's going to make to the place. In terms of governance, if you speak to the global leaders about city deals and about what's happening across the world in the best governed cities, they're all collaborative cities. There are diffuse boundaries between the private sector organisations, the public sector organisations and the community. We've got a long, long way to go in that space. But the other thing that the best cities in the world talk about is that the enduring governance arrangements around joined up decision making. And I think we have an act called the Greater Sydney Commission Act, which actually talks about 3 levels of governments participating in a joined up approach. And as one of the contributions of the city deal, we'll be talking about how we can deliver that moving forward. But what I'd say is we've cracked the glass ceiling open, but we haven't even started yet. I can see some of Danny sitting there from our health colleagues. Lucy's priority around health and education precincts, we can push that a lot further. If I think about Campbelltown, the Aerotropolis needs to be conceptualised not just as the area immediately around the airport, but that metropolitan cluster of Penrith, Liverpool and Campbelltown. The public hospitals in each of those 3 places are where we should be thinking about building our knowledge economy while we wait for the actual airport activities to come online.
Tim, he didn't answer my question, though he's very good at what he says, but should Greater Sydney Commission develop GPOP? Does New South Wales take it on? Does Parramatta Council? Without a sense of socialist, you developed East London, the thing you're in. Yeah. What do we need to do to go from this glorious planning we're doing in collaboration to actually laying track, making the place Geoff spoke about?
It struck me that when reading the GSC plan, one of the ambiguities in it was the future of the GSC itself, and I think we should all just gather round and say it has to be a critical part of the decision-making process of the future. I know it's got something of a role around collaboration precincts, but I think it should be there to keep all the delivery departments honest in their delivery of the plan, so I think that's quite critical. I think the second thing is belief that level, and I think they should be commended hugely on the land use and transport integration sort of approach of the plan, is there are certain places that are new that are going to need heavier lifting gear than just the planning system and the market. And I think there is allusions, I think, within the plan towards perhaps development corporations. I think you're going to need one to do some of what are new cities or new towns, the Aerotropolis. So I think we should, that's next business, is defining the role and the way in which a development corporation can work. They're the only things that really have successfully delivered big place transformation in the past. And just as specific, the new town development corporations in England, I can't remember how many there are now, but over 20 new towns. You borrow the money off the Treasury, you draw a line around agricultural land, you upzone it yourself in the public interest, right? And then you use that money to fund the infrastructure. So there are certain brave decisions about a new kind of delivery mechanism for Sydney. I think the last, because I always lie about when I say the last, it's an error, is to Lindy's point, the role of local government. Local government is not any old partner. When we talk about community engagement, they are the community in this most democratic form. We need an empowered local government process of delivering this plan. Elements of it are to be found in the city deal, as Lindy says. Let's have a grown-up relationship between the development of Sydney and local government in a way we haven't, I think, seen thus far.
Perfectly in for you, Lindy. A question from Jonathan Myers at Keolis Downer. We seem to be at a good moment right now for collaboration, which we're talking about, which is vital for delivery. But what are the key ingredients for sustaining bipartisan momentum over the 30 years and many electoral cycles? You've got to work to a council chamber every day. Currently, it's a good, stable, unanimous chamber that all wants to go forward. You're blessed. It hasn't always been the case, yours or other places. How do you think you won't be, hopefully you are there 30 years, and poor thing, in local government that long. I told Greg Dwyer it's dog years in local government, times 7 every year you're a CEO of a council. How do you think we sustain that? How do you embed that level of bipartisanship to keep collaboration going?
I think, as Tim's saying, our community is our power. Community needs to articulate exactly what it needs and what it wants. I think, you know, for me at the moment, and you're right, we're blessed because we have a council that may have its political majorities, but it's actually behaving and performing bipartisan way for the best of its city. And that role models to other levels of government that strategic planning shouldn't be about politics. Strategic planning should be about the health and well-being of communities. So if we can use our communities to better articulate their expectations, their dreams, their visions, and the timeframes in which they expect that to occur, then I think that helps us leverage some bipartisan.
So Ken Waxel, I mean, Nick Griner's with us. I mean, the great era of Nick and Bob Hawke together reshaping federalism, which disappeared. Kevin Rudd couldn't even shape it when every Labor Premier was there with him and they fought with each other. So it goes to waxes and wanes. For you, Geoff, we've seen this glorious era at the moment, started by Baird and Stokes, and to his credit, supported by Foley at the time, so bipartisanship to get the commission underway. All the players move and they change. Can you embed the system so it's not only personality driven? Can you actually get that collaborative approach in Sydney's DNA? We've only ever done it once, the Olympic Games, and the day the flame went out, we all went, thank God we can start fighting each other again. What is your
look,
2 or 3 years into it? Are you more confident now that it can sustain you and Lucy?
Look, it's there, but it's fragile. It does need some more work. Can I just make a comment on the city deal and the 8 councils first, though? So I work with Lindy and her colleagues on a daily basis. The city deal is not being held back by local government. The way that those 8 councils have come together across political divides, not all of the councils have stable chambers. There are a couple that have anything but stable chambers. What we've learnt this year is if you focus on joint collaborative expectations and outcomes, then a lot of those political issues go away. So local government has been a magnificent partner in where we've got to date in terms of the city deal, but my goodness, is it complex trying to deal with eight local governments, about 5 or 6 state ministers and 3 or 4 federal ministers. It's about the most complex thing you can ever do. In terms of the GSC moving forward, I think we have a lot of soft power at the moment, and a lot of that is to do with the quality of our Chief Commissioner and our other commissioners and our CEO. We need to transition in GSC 2.0 into perhaps some more hard power models that actually sustain that collaborative co-design. We've got to move beyond just purely people wanting to come to a meeting to actually having no choice but to co-design outcomes. And we're in the beginning phases with Jim and Tim Reardon and Lucy and others to think through that at the present time.
Quick poll, in the spirit of voluntary polls we've just gone through in this city, in this country. Hands up who'd like to see a GSC evolve into a more coordinated general role, whether it's a GPOT, whether it's an Metropolis. Do we want them planning on the hill, or do people feel they have a role that can go beyond that? We'll go with the yeses first. Looking good. It's a better vote than Western Sydney did in the other poll. How about the noes? Don't you love the new coalition of Miranda Devine and the Muslim community of southwest Sydney now have come together strangely? To that point, Jim, we know the government is nervous about how to pay for this. We've seen, as I said, a retreat on some of the hospital deals. The feds have, as I said, taken the airport in-house and everything else is happening. You've been through the joy and the blowtorch of the Mikey card system in Melbourne public transport, which was a tough road to hoe. You've now given assurance to government of how you've had an enormous amount of money to go on ashore. Sooner or later, we will run out of things to sell, and the hard yards have to come for other innovative funding mechanisms you spoke about before. What do we need to do as a private sector, as local government, as communities, to give the Berejiklian, Foley, Turnbull, Shorten governments, local governments of Campbelltown, etc., the confidence that it won't be sold as one big new tax, or the confidence to go in that partnership with private sector to fund more project?
Well, I think funding is one side of the equation, and new capital is always going to be important, particularly in the context of attempting to reconfigure the city in the way that we're now collectively embarked on. But it's not the only game. Like, most of the assets we're going to need in 2050 already exist today. The question is how we get best use out of them, how we manage them to prolong their life, etc. We need to be cognizant of major trends like climate change and build that into the day job of managing infrastructure. So again, it's resilient and it's enduring. And we need to be very evidence-based in our choice of projects. If we, Tim listed off half a dozen mega projects. If we get those in the wrong order over the next 20 to 40 years, then we're going to be sitting here having the same conversation about how wouldn't it be nice to...
Jim, do you get the political pressure in the old days gone by of which project comes up? You gotta love me, my phone going off. Are you able now to make fully independent decisions as government based on that? Will you ever get away, understandably, from some political pressure of what project goes first, based on where it goes and what electorate it touches?
No. So we get to produce independent advice to government, and we're working on the next state infrastructure strategy right now, which we'll be handing to the government in the new year, and we're unconstrained in terms of our capacity to give advice. What we are constrained by is a long-term fiscal envelope. So we have to be realistic about that, and that's forcing us to reach a view on choices exactly along the lines that Tim was describing.
I won't quote your former chairman as his view on North West Rail and Light Rail and City, but there needs to be that creative tension. We need to know that you have, and your board has the independence to be able to say to government, no, Minister, that's a dumb project if it goes before this project, even if there's votes in it.
Well, we do have the capacity to say that. I mean, and the government has the capacity to reject our recommendations, but it gets done in a transparent fashion. And if you look at, we're not in a precise analogue with Infrastructure Victoria, but they've come out of the toxic nightmare of the East-West Link project cancellation, and Infrastructure Victoria is now leading a bipartisan debate, and Michel Masson, my opposite number down there, spends as much time talking to the opposition as he does talking to the government. Our model is more deeply embedded within government. We deliver messages which government may not want to hear, but we deliver it in a courteous and, if necessary, confidential fashion. I don't think you can take the politics out of infrastructure, though. You can't produce this thing where we all join hands. There are going to be hard choices which are values-driven. There'll be choices about what we do in the east, what we do in the centre, what we do in the west, what we do in the regions, what we do in the city, carbon-constrained environment, limited road space, and then people's appetite for risk around things like water security or resilience and flood security. So we can't take the politics out of infrastructure, but what we can do is introduce data into the discussion and be sufficiently transparent and evidence-based that it's very hard, or it makes it increasingly hard, for politicians of either side of politics to defect and do the short-term expedient thing at the expense of the long-term right thing.
Will, Goodman, Lend-Lease, GPT, the evolved end of the property sector has been helped with us leading a debate with Tim and others and the dialogue about the engagement wanting to play. Is your patience running out? Are you getting to the end of your tether? I've never had, say, we have billions of dollars to give to somebody. Can somebody come and take my cheque so we can get something done? Is the frustration boiling up from Greg Goodman down to?
Pretty much. I think the government's attitude to value capture, affordable housing, any kind of initiative where the private sector's willing to engage and have that discussion has been met with such, I guess, disinterest. And I don't know if they're petrified of making a decision or they're just incapable of making a decision. But there are so many instances where, we presented 6 months ago an affordable housing model to the Department of Planning that was 5% of our entire urban renewal portfolio, self-sustaining, self-funded, and it was warmly received, but that was the last we've heard about it. Light rail, value capture models, thanks, but no thanks. There's just a lack of engagement, really, and this is the problem. And I don't criticise the Greater Sydney Commission. I've been an advocate for it, and I hope it does get greater power to control this infrastructure spend, because there's just such a lack of coordination, and no station at Alexandria is a good example of that. But no one's dealing with the now, and the Greater Sydney Commission's task seems to be, to me, for the tomorrow, which is a good thing, and the planning should be done. But nothing's being done now. I can point to a dozen places that are priority precincts that have been around for 5 years.
Nothing's being done now. you're saying in Sydney.
No, we're building stuff. I understand we're building stuff, but the value of that, or the assumption that it's going to create jobs other than construction jobs, or housing opportunities, et cetera, is 5 to 10 years away. So, but at the meantime, I've referred to Eastern Creek before. You go to the Minister for Transport and say, well, you've just given $1 billion to Badgerys Creek for roads that aren't needed for 5 or 10 years, but we've got a $500 million deficit for road infrastructure in Eastern Creek, which is the only zoned large open spaces for freight and logistics. What are you doing? And he says, well, go and see the Minister for Planning. And you go to the Minister for Planning. He goes, oh, we don't have the money, and we're not going to ask Treasury for any more money. So what do you want to do? You want jobs in Western Sydney or not?
Lindy, to that point, we heard announced today possibly 30,000 new homes at the imaginatively named Southwest Creek, because it's just west of South Creek, in New South Wales. The Department of Branding in this state is in charge of things. Another 30,000 homes who are going to get in their car and drive to Campbelltown station every day to get the train to the city. That is as slow as it was 100 years ago. So to Will's point, while you'll have confidence that over the horizon, the engagement you're having on city deals, etc., do you, with respect, stop and think another 30,000 homes in an area that doesn't have a train already, that has Oran Park or a city the size of Canberra, west of Campbelltown, no commitment to a train yet? Why possibly could we be announcing more home lot release without the infrastructure to go with it?
Yeah, don't just mention that one. We've also got Wilton Newtown heading in the other direction. But I think it's terrifying. It's terrifying for a place like Campbelltown that at the moment 70% of the commuters parking in our commuter car parks are from not within our LGA.
Philip Ruddock's just banned them in the North Shore, apparently. Everyone in the Central Coast is not welcome to park in Hornsby. So you've got to you can put a toll on it, or the other way.
Yeah. We've thought about it. No, look, seriously, we understand our role because we do currently have the infrastructure. But that infrastructure is outdated, and I have to agree. The thing that I get frustrated with is that people don't realise that it is the now. The issues are happening now. So not that long ago, it would take 10 minutes to get from Camden Hospital to Campbelltown Hospital, which is really important if you are very, very ill. Now it takes an hour. So I use that example in helping people understand that that can't be maintained for 10 years. So the things that we're advocating for in the short term are things like road openings and links that are going across that way so that ambulances can get to where they need to go. But it is that whole prioritisation. Who gets to determine the prioritisation of where the investment of infrastructure goes is the $1 million question. If I'm going to fight for my community because I know that at the end of the day Campbelltown is responsible for the southwest growth areas. Put aside the growth that it's going to occur itself, it has to supply the avenues for public transport, hospitals, universities and shopping centres for what will be 1.57 million people. So.
The clock says we're going to answer. Last question to a couple of old stagers, one of which is about to leave the stage, the city, and one of which is not allowed to leave yet. So we go to the guys who've got to leave first, and I'll give you the last word, Geoff. Tim, you've had a time this thing. Phil Nichols at WSP says, where do you actually think this city will be in 30 years' time? You've had a little glorious stint trying to turn it around, wake it up, shake it up, but now you're buggering off. I was 20 years in my job as an association. You've had 2.5 or 3.
Unbelievable. Everything
anyway, cut and run Williams, we're calling him. But
so,
do you go with more confidence than you arrive? Do you think the people on stage, public and private, will deliver this? Am I right to be frustrated about, despite the glory of the planning, we're still a bit short on
apart from the fact that I should have told you off for referring to me as essentially Australia's leading Welsh intellectual when the audience response was, there's only one. So the second thing is that, if we're lucky, look, the opportunity of Australia, and particularly Sydney, is extraordinary. If anybody coming here, I've been here 7 years, my wife's from Sydney, is, 1.7% population growth. GDP has grown about 27% since the crash. In the UK, it's grown about 10%. Since I've been in Sydney, 600,000 more people have come here. There's no relationship between those two facts. So, But essentially this, right? So you've got the opportunity to be great. Will we choose to do so? And I think what we hear here is very interesting, is that the private sector, in all its animal spirits, is raring to go, but always needs to be channeled. And it knows that it does. It knows that it's best work in cities when the public sector is at the top of its game, right? So there's a kind of request for the public sector to be at the top of its game. And it's not at the top of your game to announce a place with 37,000 homes totally prematurely, where there's no planned infrastructure. And when you put the houses there first...
Or jobs.
Or jobs. When you put the houses there first, there is then no rationale to put public transport there. It's I was going to say chicken and egg. I think my father would call it arse about face, right? So essentially, you've got the resources and now the institutional coming together of things like the GSC, because there's been an institutional gap in Sydney, and the collaborations are there. But I think Lindy's right. The future is now. We are closing off some options now. And so we've got to, do no harm. The Hippocratic Oath is line one. I think the second thing is build on the GSC. It makes it unique in Australia. On the Federal Cities Reference Group, which I sit, the Minister says if only all Australian capital cities had the GSC. So no question, everybody's saying build on it.
Fantastic. Geoff, firstly, you get an award because you didn't mention string of pearls at any stage up here, which is, I've checked, and that's remarkable achievement. And you didn't bag me for announcing...
Because he's realised there's a diamond in that string of pearls.
Oh, nice. Well, he didn't bag me for announcing that Macarthur should eventually be the fourth city, Sydney and Macarthur, Illawarra together. I'm just redrafting Lucy and Geoff's plan for them already. It's a week old. Mate, you are halfway through, whatever part through the great transition, the introduction of the GSC, Airtropolis, etc. I won't ask you to what the future of your organisation should be. I think there's a resounding support in this room for where it should go. But what do you technically, down in the ditch, what do you technically need to make the dream you and Lucy and the other commissioners have had going forward? What's missing? You get a chance to be John Bradfield, who was a bureaucrat but would stand in the domain and demand government would help him build the Harbour Bridge. The platform ensures, what do you need? What do we all, not only government, what does everybody get behind to make that a reality and not just a glorious dream?
We need a single implementer of city outcomes. So we're at 4.5 weeks into our exhibition phase. More than 300,000 Sydney-siders have connected with us on social media. That's unparalleled in planning exercises. The major message we're getting to this point in time is stop planning and get on with it. We like your plan, it seems to make sense. Get on with it. So what we're in discussions with government about at the moment is clarity. There wouldn't be a person in the room that doesn't acknowledge that there are some overlaps between what the Commission are trying to do and other arms of government. So next year, early next year, we need to be, and we are having conversations with Tim Reardon and other elements of government, Jim Betts and so on, about being clear about what our role is in GSC 2.0, but we need a singular city implementer that actually makes sure we continue delivering joined-up decisions as we are currently planning for joined-up decisions.
Well, as if to echo the challenge we have in getting political certainty, I've just heard that Nick Xenophon's replacement senator's just resigned already as a British citizen, so... Wow, we talk about certainty going forward. So I was in the Liberal. Albo's in the room, everybody. So the opposition will. I stand corrected, sir. But the uncertainty goes on. Oh, now we've got the sort of debate I wanted. The old stages are back. It's great. They're all at the High Court these days, and that's. Can I just say, on this stage, my obvious frustration has come through as we present the figures today of moving Western Australia into Western Sydney to accommodate them, but sadly their infrastructure doesn't come with them. Their roads and train lines and schools and hospital beds don't come. We've got to find them somewhere else. The one thing we can have confidence today on the stage is 5 people for whom the city is better for having them in the city shaping debate. The bookend agencies at either end, Infrastructure New South Wales and Greater Sydney Commission, a great partnership which could have been turf war and hasn't been, and been working really closely together, and that's testimony to the leadership of both. Tim Williams, if all advocates for the business sector are as active and smart as Tim, we wouldn't have the problem we're facing. So, sir, don't go too far. I hope they find someone good to replace you. There must be an Irishman or a Scotsman somewhere, or a woman coming down to the great urbanists of the north to come and help us develop our city.
I can't help you.
To Will Dwyer, I say, sir, don't give up, please. Greg's got a lot of money and we really need it to help develop Western Sydney. So if they don't want it, I'll take it. Trust me, I'll find a way. We can spend it somewhere. The Eels needed another halfback. And Lindy, to you, as I said, that Whitlam quote was pretty much, you think of the great Macquarie cities of the west, Liverpool, Penrith, Parramatta on the rivers, the Whitlam cities, the black towns, the Campbelltowns, which have been left behind. And I know you're not going to let Campbelltown be left behind, and the single-handed campaign to drive that and to think about the new city, the fourth city, Macarthur, which is really important. So I think you can all have confidence, ladies and gentlemen, that the tough debate we have today is that we are staying focused on delivery. We don't want to forget planning. We don't stop planning. Planning's an ongoing thing, which hasn't been enough in this city. But we also need to go to the next stage and get those things delivered. So can you please join me in thanking our eminent panel.